A few days ago, Lazy Peon made a video about Guild Wars 2 in 2023. He usually does these videos essentially playing the game for a few hours, checking the new content / expansion, reviewing it and saying what the pros and cons are about this game in the current year. Now, I like Lazy Peon and I have watched his videos for years, and I find this format a good way of understanding fast where an MMO is and at this point in time. It is a good summary for people who don't really have the time to try it out and do it for themselves, right? But I have a big issue on how this review particularly is presented. A lot of the criticism and even positives are misrepresented or flat out or wrong, and it almost seems like he played the expansion for 2 hours, gave up, played some PvP and called it a day, which in my opinion is not enough for, an actual review of an MMO expansion or even the game in the current year. I'm not saying he should have played for 800 hours, but at least finish the 8-hour expansion or engage with the mechanics and features that are being presented in the expansion as a new player. Now I'll proceed to list the problems I have with this review and why I think it should have been a lot better. He starts the video explaining what the expansion entails and where he was the last time he stopped. Then proceeds to complain about the inventory having too much trash, which is a fair criticism since honestly, most hardcore Guild Wars 2 fanboys even hate the inventory system and how much trash it gives to you. And sure, you can buy bags and all this stuff, but if it overwhelms you, especially as a new player, it is not an excuse to have a bad system. He picks his Elementalist and chooses the Catalyst build to play the expansion. A very complicated build and class, but honestly, he could have not known this, and he tries to learn the rotation anyways, so kudos to him. Now, here's where my first real problem appears with the review. He complains about the fact that the map completion isn't shared through characters, because he can't waypoints to one place to the other, so he essentially has to walk to actually start the expansion. I would agree with this if it weren't for the fact that a huge part of the game, and I found something that people really enjoy about this game, is doing the map completion to earn rewards and essentially gifts to craft legendaries, and then using them for yourself or selling them to other people. It is a very important part of the endgame economy and of course rewards. In order to make a legendary, you need to do a map completion and then essentially craft it with this map completion gift that you get. When you see a legendary in the world, someone spent their time to explore everything in the map in order to craft it. And of course you can wear it or sell it to someone else, but of course if it's a generation 2 legendary, you know that exact person actually did the map completion in order to get this. Making a count-bound completion would not make any sense for this game, and complaining about it, it's almost like complaining about an orange not being a banana. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, if I'm fair, I could meet him halfway. Maybe waypoints should indeed be a count-bound, since they are a very small part of the map completion, and the inconvenience of not being able to use ults is bigger than the upside. Might as well just give them to them. Teleport to friends just lets you teleport to someone else that is in your party, and of course waypoint unlocks literally unlock every waypoint in the core game, so this isn't an issue. The game does give it to you for free as well, but you can buy them as well. Now these things are monetized, so you can definitely criticize that, but he didn't even know it existed. And even then, you can still ask someone else to use a siege turtle to teleport you around to get the different waypoints for free. I do, however, think it would be nice if the game gave waypoints unlocks to every character. This, however, was not a point he presented. He also says the game looks bad and aged poorly, which in my opinion is not really true, especially because it's a stylized type of graphic, but it is subjective, and since he likes games like that look very realistic like VDO or whatever, I could understand him feeling this way. He then says that this is one of the reasons why he would like Guild Wars 3 being made instead of continuing with Guild Wars 2. I think there's definitely people who feel this way, but it's also very incorrect to think this because, well, ArenaNet, the company that makes this game, has emphasized with communication and, of course, features in the game that essentially double down on, keeping the game alive for a long time, that they actually focusing on Guild Wars 2. The Wizards Vault giving us a lot of rewards for us to actually stay in the game and play it consistently, and of course giving us objectives, especially for new players who get very lost, remaking League Wars Season 1 for new players to actually play the story that essentially was lost in time, moving from DX9 to DX11, and of course alliances that honestly they've been there for they've been trying to do it for 5 years and they're still continuing and not really giving up, even though some people say that they maybe should. They're definitely trying to build up the game. Making Guild Wars 3 and essentially destroying their main source of income would be a big mistake. Now, people can disagree with us, but there's way more evidence that ArenaNet are not going to do a new game other than the other way around. And at least not acknowledging this evidence is, in my opinion, a mistake. To be fair, this is some meta information that you can only sometimes know if you keep up with the posts about ArenaNet, but some of them are actually in the game. And honestly, if you're gonna have this take, might as well make some research about it. He then has a very, honestly, good criticism about essentially the title screen of the new expansion being shown in a random island while other NPCs are talking about the story. It is honestly very immersion breaking, and I actually find it very, very bad and very scuffed, and I think he says that in the video as well. Also, again, the same problem happens when multiple NPCs start talking to each other at the same time and you cannot hear anything. You get overwhelmed, and honestly, I would just, if I was a new player, I wouldn't even continue playing if that happened to me, okay? I think all of these criticisms are perfectly valid and something that a new player would really, really not like. He also talks about the Wizard Vault in a good way and explains the system very fast, but well enough for viewers to get the hang of it without investing too much time on it. Until now, the video is pretty okay. Even some things aren't perfect, and honestly, the game is so huge, it's an MMO, you are bound to miss some stuff. I think it's fair, I think it's okay. That being said, here's where the review takes a little bit of a nosedive. He just now realizes novelties, chairs, and minis exist, even though he has been doing Guild Wars 2 reviews for the past 5 years. This wasn't released with the expansion, it has been here for years, since Pathfinder in 2017. Minis for even before that. Imagine doing a Dragonfly review and saying, wow, they added mini pets. This makes no sense. This is when I started getting a bit worried about the review. There's a lot of very surface level content that is just not being mentioned. He also has not shown the Sky Skull, which he's actually engaging with, not shown the masteries that interact with the mounts, like ley lines and updrafts, and not talked about the weapon mastery that lets him use his hammer, you know, catalyst weapon, on his old Tempest main that he has played before, and he will play again in the video later on. Not engaged with the relic system in more than a surface level way, and also hasn't done the meta in the first map, even though he could do it at any point. Which are honestly all of very important expansion features that the game advertises. For the rest of the positives, I think they're pretty good, and they're pretty fair. As a new player, there's a lot from even this part of the playthrough that is missing, and honestly shouldn't be, even for a first impression video, as these are the first things you would see as a new player playing the expansion. Also, all of these things are never mentioned or shown in the video. He then proceeds to fight a boss in the story and is unable to kill it without respawning infinitely. Now, I wouldn't go too hard on him here because honestly, his build was a bit scuffed and it was hard to play, even though he took it from an actual website. If you don't know how to heal on Catalyst, you'll feed endlessly. That being said, as I previously mentioned, he has not engaged with any of the mechanics that the game provides you at this time to make it easier for himself. He could go back to his main to try and kill the boss, even while using Hammer to try the new expansion feature. And he could engage with relics to maybe find one that makes it easier for him to survive. Fuck, the relics that the game gives you in the story even give you an option to pick a survival relic. Honestly, I don't think this would have changed much, but the lack of trying and interest is very concerning considering he's trying to review the expansion. He does mention the game never have felt hard before, so he didn't have a reason to care to get better. And now he's hitting this random hard check that he can't pass through. And I think, honestly, that is definitely a good critique to have. This game is way too hard for new players, it's a lot of complexity, and it doesn't do a good job of ramping difficulty up to make you want to engage with the build and the content. It is also not good that if you get the wrong build, you will have a harder time as a new player than the rest of the people. Honestly, considering all of these things, I would agree. Honestly, Dagda maybe should have been a bit easier to do. He then proceeds to play PP and Wolver's World, which is one he really enjoys in Guild Wars 2, which is, in my opinion, fair. If you don't like the story, you don't do it, right? You shouldn't have to be forced to do it. Honestly, skip it. It's a definitely fair thing to do, and relics have changed Wolver's World and PP in a cool way. But again, he doesn't really engage with the new expansion systems and just does a very surface gameplay showcase of the game modes. That being said, this is where the review ends. He didn't finish the story, didn't go to almost any of the expansion features, contents, and systems, and missed the entirety of 2 whole maps. He also did not showcase one of the biggest selling points features of the expansion, the big dragon that the game gives you and shoots fireball out of his mouth and goes insanely fast on ley lines. Imagine reviewing Dragonflight without mentioning the Dragonflying at all. He misses everything that Guild Wars 2 in 2023 is actually providing. it is fair not to enjoy the story. And it sucks that it doesn't have a skip. But man, dude, this is your job. You're making a review of Guild Wars 2 in 2023, using Give what Guild Wars 2 has given to you in 2023. If you don't like the story, dude, that's fair. Skip it. Let it play out while you get a sandwich, or you do something on your other monitor, edit a video, whatever. And come back, kill the mobs, move on. Don't make a video reviewing the game and expansion and finish 1/4 of it. I think most of his pros and cons lists are pretty fair, but some positives don't even make sense considering his own review. Good storytelling? Well, you really didn't show that at all, and actively complain about the story being there. And fuck, you even stopped playing the game because of it. Epic event bosses, he didn't even show any of them, even the old ones. And the new ones from the expansion, which were available for them, also weren't shown at all. I honestly think this could have been honestly a negative, because these ones are not as epic as other ones in other expansions. Good horizontal progression. How will we know this? We haven't seen any of it. Nor the old progression, nor the new one from this actual expansion, which you could have engaged with. For the rest of the positives, I think they're pretty good, and they're pretty fair. For the cons, visually outdated overall. It's a subjective topic, and I think it's fair if he thinks this way. Difficulty to get into. Honestly, big true. This game is kind of hard, it's very complex, there's a lot of things to think about, and you will get farmed if you don't put a little bit of research into it. Which is honestly a very, honestly not a good thing, especially for a casual MMO as Guild Wars 2 is. And the fact that it's so different to other MMOs, it definitely doesn't help, and it alienates new players heavily. Not fully open world. If you don't like this, there's nothing to do. The game is like this, and that's unlucky, right? I don't think, honestly, I guess it's objectively a negative. Even though this game does it pretty well, at the end of the day, not being fully open world, it sucks. PvP has been neglected. That is true, but honestly, every other MMO PvP has been neglected as well. And this game does a good job at keeping it relevant with automated tournaments monthly and daily, which are pretty hyped to be honest, especially the monthlies, and balance and new combat to make it seem a bit fresh. And honestly, they probably shouldn't update it as much. There's a lot of work put into it with not a lot of return on investment. And sure, they haven't put any maps, but of course, this is a lot of effort as well. Map completion not being account-wide. As we discussed earlier, this isn't really a fair criticism, because not only the game does provide you with solutions to this, it is an essential part of the game loop. I would be okay though with just making it so the waypoints unlocks would go to every character, to be honest. Now, here's where the big part of the video starts. The hot take. The game essentially being too horizontal while not being horizontal enough. In this segment, he argues that, well, the game should get rid of gear because it's meaningless anyways and it just makes new players have a worse time than they should. Might as well double down and delete the gear, it doesn't matter, and just give it to everyone. And just make it like in PvP where you can just select stats and everything freely with no problem. The game does have a lot of stat combinations, but that's honestly kind of the point of the game. Getting new gear to get new builds. This is a core part of feeling like you progress in the game, and deleting it would honestly just delete an insane amount of horizontal progression from the game. And it wouldn't even really work because people usually like gearing in MMOs. It is an MMO at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it is also an RPG. He then says that if you're a PvX player, your bags will be littered with gear. This is not true. Legendary and equipment templates essentially fix this completely. Legendary gear lets you stat swap on every character whenever you want and is a good optional kind of vertical / grind progression feature to get, as it would solve not only his vertical progression issues with the game, but also the problem with him having so much gear in his bags. But honestly, this is a non-issue for newer players anyways, because they don't do ults, they're new players. And the game gives you equipment templates, so this isn't really an issue. And if you're a hardcore player, you'll just go for Legendary Armory. And essentially, everyone gets kinda satisfied. I also don't like the fact that he complains about having to buy gear in the TP, when it's very cheap and one of the most, if not the most accessible way to get gear in any MMO. In other MMOs, you literally are forced to grind gear to engage with the actual content. If I were to guess though, he probably bought the named Berserker gear from the training post, which is way more expensive, and honestly, that's an A at L because that is just confusing for new players for no reason. And you can get a way better deal. He also mentions that gear doesn't feel rewarding in this game. Honestly, that is fair. That is completely true. The game essentially treats gear as a material that you salvage or sell to make gold, and essentially showers you with it. This makes you completely lose any sort of meaning and reward feeling to getting gear. This is a big issue, but it's more of an economic issue more than a gear one. But in my opinion, the solution is not to throw the baby with the bathwater and just delete all of the gear, but instead make the gear feel rewarding by not treating it like complete garbage, essentially a salvageable material, and just filling up our bags enough that essentially we hate the gear because we just want to have our bags free and clean. Now we come to the conclusion part of his video. He says that there's nothing new for new players. This is the exact opposite. This expansion is literally made for new players. Skyscale Dragon was put in there just for new players to not have to sit through hundreds of hours of gameplay to get it. And instead go into the new expansion, have fun and get the reward instantly. Go from level 1 to 80, go to the new expansion instead of having to go to different like hundreds of hours of old content and get there. Have fun with your friends, just go. Same thing for the story. They made it so you don't need any context from other expansions to actually experience this expansion story, which is also a great feature for new players. The Wizard's Vault also helps with this, as it shows new players what to do in the game instead of being lost, which has been a very big issue in Guild Wars 2, as it's so sandboxy and there's so many things to do in the game. Not counting all of the quality of life improvements we have gotten through this year, and of course on the expansion as well. Then he proceeds to say that it doesn't really add anything new to the game. Man, there's so many things, not only the things that we already mentioned as for new players, it also gives the flying mounts the possibility to go around in lane lands and updrafts, things that were only available beforehand for gliding, which makes it way more fun to navigate with. They give us refs, which is essentially a new system to grind and get more content in open world, which is very new for Guild Wars 2, considering only we had metas that were timed instead of actually being able to be grinded forever and ever. Weapon mastery that essentially changes the balance of the game completely. Some people might even say for the worse of the game. And of course relics, which also essentially change how runes work and give us a lot of new effects and ways to engage with the character in every game mode. It is also very funny that Dion mentioned novelties as being a very important new thing to the game and a new addition, considering you thought that this expansion brought it to you. He then proceeds to say that he is essentially in Guild Wars 3 waiting room, while not knowing anything about the Guild Wars 3 situation and plans that we have established earlier, making it almost seems like there's no point in playing Guild Wars 2, as it's better for another game to come out, essentially to replace it instead. With no actual arguments behind this, and honestly, only having evidence to show the exact opposite, especially considering the game is doing pretty well. And I think that is the biggest problem I have with this video. He's essentially judging the game for something it isn't, out of lack of information. A lot of criticisms are completely valid because the answers are in the game or a Google search away. His whole opinions are based on misconceptions that honestly should be researched as a good reviewer before making your mind about them, or by actually engaging with what the game is showing you and presenting you as a new expansion player experience. Honestly, I don't even care if it's negative around the game. I don't care if he hates it. There are huge problems with this game, some being portrayed in this video. But when a lot of the negatives and positives are actually misinformation, it's just damaging to the game, and honestly, it makes for a bad review. And some people will say, well, it's wrong to judge a video in this way because it's just his first impressions. But that is also wrong because he has played the game for a long time and he's not presenting his criticisms as first impressions, but as a semi-veteran player, which he probably isn't either. It would have been a different story if he would have gone through the video as a new player and focusing on how a new player would perceive this game. But he didn't do this, especially considering this is a very heavy new player focused expansion. And the conclusion of the game is a very old player focused critique. And his conclusion to the game is a very old player focused critique. Just move to Guild Wars 3 instead. He mainly showcased old game modes without even showing what changed on them with the new expansion. Not to mention, he didn't show almost any content of the new expansion anyways. Things that a new player would perceive. If you're gonna review an expansion, at least showcase it and finish it. I'm not saying you don't have to know everything about the game, but even the things that should be experienced as a new player trying the new expansion are not really shown. At the end of the day, I don't hate Peon, and I've watched his videos for years, but this video isn't up to par. I think he can do and should do better. We always judge game reviewers for not being able to finish the game or not having enough knowledge for the game to do a good review. There's no difference here. If you can't make a good review of a game or you just don't want to, don't do it. There is no point in spreading misinformation about what the actual game is, and it doesn't look good for you either. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, debate me on the comments, or come to my stream and shit on me there. Have a good one, guys. See you guys around. Bye bye.